Sometimes I really love Reddit. Some time ago, I was scrolling and saw this post. Is anyone else grieving the future they thought they'd have? I, 22 female, can barely afford rent. Buying a home, not even on the radar. Everything is just so fucking expensive, and honestly, the state of the world makes me feel sick. It feels like our laws don't matter anymore. The US keeps starting or funding wars, backing genocides, hurting the most vulnerable people. Climate change is getting worse. The economy's trash. It's like there's always another crisis waiting to drop. I've accepted that we have to work 3 times harder than our parents just to survive. I've accepted that being a POC in this world means carrying even more weight. But what's been quietly breaking me is realizing that I might never be in the right place, financially, emotionally, mentally, to be a parent. And that's what's really been messing me up. I grew up thinking that if I just worked hard, got good grades, stayed out of trouble, I'd eventually get there. I imagined having a home, a partner, a family. I imagined being a parent. That was the dream. And now I feel fucking robbed. Because I know I'll never be selfish enough to have a family I can't care for. I would be okay with renting forever, not having much to spend on me or no vacation, but we can't even get that anymore. Anyone else feel this way too? My first reaction was a wave of compassion for that person. I feel like I've been robbed of my dreams as well. Maybe a little differently, as I never really considered having children. It just always seemed like something not for me. But I had dreams that I'm also slowly giving up on. I always wanted an apartment of my own, nothing big or fancy, something with 2 bedrooms maybe, in a city where I went to university and currently live in. I also always wanted to travel, not a fully digital nomad lifestyle or anything like that, but going on one bigger vacation a year and maybe 2 or 3 weekend trips would be nice. I always wanted a cool job where I could really spread my wings, something like being a journalist or anything creative like that. But the reality we are in doesn't allow for any of that. I'm probably never going to own a 2 bedroom apartment. Maybe when I'm in my 40s, I'll be able to afford a 1 bedroom on the outskirts of the city. Traveling seems more available than ever. It's relatively cheap compared to how much everyday life costs, but as I'm unable to find a stable job that pays at least minimum wage, that dream slowly dies as well. And the work itself, I always thought that if I spent enough time studying, I would be able to pick and choose. I finished a good university, I have a master's and can't find anything, let alone something the least bit exciting. So I really related to that post. I feel like our generation was promised so much and the reality really disappointed us. I know I'm not the only one whose parents told them that studying in school is the way to become successful in the future. And that's just utter bullshit. Nobody cares about university anymore, since almost everyone has a degree now. And even those who managed to get well-paying jobs can't afford apartments or houses. I'm 25 right now, I have friends who are older than me, they have been working hard their whole lives and still rent or live with their parents with no end in sight. I started reading the replies to that post, and one comment especially stood out to me. This in no way represents an attempt at diagnosis, but you may want to read up on a moral injury. When people mourn a view of the world as they thought it existed, it is very common among veterans. I don't have anything to offer you that can help your situation, but sometimes having words to properly describe matters itself can help. I'm sorry you were born into this, and I wish you good luck in the future. As a psychology graduate, I was really surprised by a psychological term that I was completely unfamiliar with. Thankfully, the internet exists, and I quickly supplemented my knowledge with the following information. Moral injury is a specific trauma that arises when people face situations that deeply violate their conscience or threaten their core values. Those who grapple with it can struggle with guilt, anger, and a consuming sense that they can't forgive themselves or others. It often arises when one knows the right thing to do, but constraints make it nearly impossible to pursue the right course of action. This quote comes from a Scientific American article in which Elizabeth Svoboda describes it as a condition that often happens to medical professionals. As an example, Svoboda describes the story of a doctor who realized during COVID that some people have absolutely no respect for other humans' lives. She was forced to send patients away with no help whatsoever because her hospital was full. Yet, there were people who would barge into the building with no mask and get angry at the doctor when she told them they could have COVID. Similar situations happen to social workers, teachers, lawyers, veterans, not just during COVID. If you're interested in that topic, the link to that article is in the description. As moral injury is still a relatively new term, it is still being studied and supplemented with new information. However, we can already name some things that cause it. There are 3 identified primary causes of moral injury. An act of commission, when someone does something they should not have done or that strongly goes against their own moral code. An act of omission, when someone should have done something but did not. And betrayal, when someone feels betrayed by others, particularly by a higher authority who either acted, failed to act, or compelled an individual to act in a way that goes against their moral code. The last cause, betrayal, is what really ties with the Gen Z experience, in my opinion. Like I said before, most of us were told that if we study, then work hard, we'll be successful. Success was loosely defined as having a lot of money and dignity. Our parents or other adults told us that if we do well in school, we won't have to clean the streets or work as store clerks, because those jobs are demeaning and that's what uneducated people do. Right now, I'm not going to analyze how deeply flawed that reasoning is. Store clerks and street cleaners are among essential jobs which we couldn't go without as society. Nonetheless, the adults in our lives told us that school would guarantee we could get a respectable job like a lawyer, accountant, or corporate worker. We would have a lot of money, so we could buy a nice house and support our family, go on vacations, and buy fancy clothes. So we did what we were told. We studied well, did extracurricular activities, we learned foreign languages, went to universities, got degrees and certifications. Gen Z is on track to be the most educated generation. We have higher high school graduation rates and lower dropout rates than previous generations. Additionally, a large percentage of Gen Z students are pursuing higher education compared to our predecessors. And we can barely get minimum wage jobs. We are offered unpaid internships with a vague promise of a paid position one day. When we look for actual jobs, minimum wage seems like a stretch. We are told that we have to work our way up the ladder before we want more money. But what if the ladder is broken and we can only get so far? Because even those among older Gen Z who have been working for a while now climb their way up and earn more money, can't afford houses and families. People make a big fuss about how Gen Z doesn't have children, but how are we supposed to do that? With no stable housing and job, we don't want to bring children into the world because they will only destabilize our lives further. So we did what we were told, but we are not getting the reward we were promised. We've put in the work, and that resulted in people calling us lazy and entitled for wanting a place to live and a job, which should be the bare minimum. That's why I think what we are experiencing as a generation could be considered moral injury. We were promised things for working hard, we've put in the work, and now we are ridiculed for believing the authorities in the first place. We are the scapegoats for all the problems. Gen Z workers are supposedly the worst among all generations. We are not having children, we don't get married. Apparently, because of our unwillingness to participate, we will cause a societal collapse. That could also explain why Gen Z is experiencing so many mental health problems. Sure, it's a much broader issue, but since moral injury can cause depression, anxiety, anger, and feelings of shame or guilt, it could be an important contributing factor. Yet, when we raise any issues and ask for help, we are told to shut up and do our work. But when there is no incentive to work, it just becomes a burden you have to go through to be able to afford groceries. So why try and sacrifice our time and energy when so far from our experience that gets us nowhere? I didn't do any research, so I don't know if the Gen Z experience could actually be described as moral injury. But it's definitely something to think about. So, if you could give me a few seconds of your time and tell me in the comments if you agree or not, I would be eternally grateful. Obviously, if you'd like to see more from me, feel free to subscribe.